Jake is wrong about 5v5 being better for Overwatch, or better than at least 6v6 for Overwatch, and I'm going to tell you why right here, right now. Recently, he appeared on the Group Up podcast, and while there are other people on there, and there are other people that are pro 5v5, I want to focus on Jake specifically because he seems to be the one with the most, or the best articulated argument towards 5v5, which I fully understand. I don't think that he's fully wrong in what he wants to do with Overwatch, and the opinions and perspectives that he's giving are valid in terms of what we're doing and how we're building Overwatch as a game. But the big but is there's a lot of assumptions that come with the way that he wants to balance the game, and there's also a lot of assumptions too that everybody else is bringing to the table that I don't think we fully have come to grasp with yet as a community. Maybe in a few more years we'll have something to deal with. Of course, we have to wait for the developers to catch up to our mindsets first, or to at least attempt our mindsets first. But the one big thing that everybody is missing, that Jake is missing, is that tanks don't need to have so much health. People are going to argue right away. Yes, absolutely. What makes them a tank? They have lots of health. They have the ability to absorb damage. That's the big thing. They have the ability to absorb damage. But not just absorb damage, but create space in its most abstract. If you take a game like Counter-Strike, for example, who is the tank on the Counter-Strike team? You have 5 people. You go, who is the tank? Well, really, the tank is going to be your entry fragger, which is going to be the person you want to have the armor first, because they're going to take the first few hits. Now, is a tank in Counter-Strike, and I know they don't technically exist, but we're creating them anyways, is a tank in Counter-Strike any, like, more, of course they are more powerful than a default player, but are they significantly more powerful? Someone would argue yes. They do have a lot more power because they have basically twice the survivability, twice the amount of health. But the big but is that everybody in the end comes up to that same power level, and it's the minute differences between the characters in Counter-Strike that really make the tanks, right? It's a minute difference in the first place from 0 to 100 to give somebody armor, and it's an even more minuscule amount of power increase, you could say, bring somebody up from the average person in the game up to the tank level. We don't apply this in Overwatch, and the reason why we don't apply this in Overwatch is because we originally had 6v6, and 6v6 was balanced in such a way that if you had one character versus another character, they were relatively even. That's all they were doing. At least this is the way I see it, and you guys can question it as is, but this, you'll probably agree with me once we get into it. When you have an environment of characters and you're trying to create a release or a set of release characters for millions of people, and you don't know how you're going to balance them, the easiest way to balance them is in a 1v1. And I used to do this all the time. Of course, in my community, Sunday Scrub Club Scraps, come join us every single Sunday. We do Sunday fights. Join us in the Discord. Information is down below. We have done every single type of 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4 possibly could. Every single variation of character, every single variation of balance. Well, of course, I'm going to lay some claim to this, every single variation. But if you take the average Overwatch 1 character and put it in a 1v1 with another random Overwatch 1v1, Overwatch 1v1, those two characters would absolutely, most of the time, be completely even. I can almost guarantee it. Even if you're up against a tank and you were, let's say, for example, a Zenyatta up against a Winston in a 1v1, if you played it smart, you'd still have a chance. But now, if you take Overwatch 2, for some reason we've decided, we need our tanks to be significantly more powerful than everybody else. And the question is why? We go, well, we removed a tank. But if it's a game that stands on its own, why do we need to make up for that in the 5v5 setting? Why could you just not have 5 characters of all even power? and pit them against each other. And the tanks have space-taking power, and the supports have healing and supporting power. But in a 1v1, every single character is relatively even. Relatively. Why? Now the question is, why do we, like, we know where this comes from, where this weird mentality, or we know the existence of it, but like, where does it come from? Well, it comes from the fact that because we had 6v6, we remove one tank. We want the feel of 6v6. That's all it is. That's all a buffed up tank in 5v5 is they want the feel of 6 players, but they don't want to have the responsibility of balancing for 6 players. So while we do, like, while I'm watching Jake talk a lot about, like, you need this setup and it's gonna be really hard to balance with one extra thing and one extra player, like, we're playing such a fundamentally different game than Overwatch 1 that I don't even think I want to call it Overwatch anymore, because it's not. We're playing like a multiplayer Evolve. I don't know if that game is like where, you know, you have these like big tanky characters on the battlefield, and you have like little weak characters that run all around them that kind of do things around. It's a totally different game than the original Overwatch. Why do we need our tanks to be tanky? Well, it's because we need the game to be played the way that we played it when we were in 6v6. But it's like, it's kind of our having our cake and eating it too, right? We're trying to say, hey, we want the game to play like 6v6, but we don't want the 6v6 because it's too hard to deal with in terms of balance. There's a lot of arguments too, for example, that I really didn't like talking about too how Junker Queen, there's no way she could be she could work in a 6v6 situation. Absolutely. Like, have you ever called a rework? Like, we added features to these tanks to make them buff them like crazy, to make them extremely powerful. Like, there's one point where he's like, I'm pretty sure it was Jake. I'll have to bring up the video again for myself, but it was mentioned like, can you imagine speed boost and armor buff on like 5 other players, and one of them is also a tank? It's like, yeah, that would be absolutely crazy, but Junker Queen as an off tank wouldn't do that much healing. She wouldn't do that much speed boost. Like, there's a lot of things that we take for granted in Overwatch 2, where we're just like, we want this to feel like we need these characters to be crazy powerful and have lots of utility, because they're going to be making up for 2 people, or they're making up for 1 extra person when they should be playing 1 extra person. That's where I think a lot of people are thinking about Overwatch wrong if they like Overwatch 2. I absolutely think, and I am the #1 person to say, hey, people should be able to play Overwatch however they want to play it. And the problem is Blizzard doesn't let us play however they want to play it. I'm going to say it over and over again in all these videos. It is a closed wall garden environment. If other people were allowed to create their own ladders, they would create their own 5v5 tournaments. They would create their own 1v1 tournaments. We would see all those things, but we don't. I'm going to argue always that 6v6 is the better way of playing Overwatch. And I know this is a little bit of a rant, a little bit of just, I don't even know what I'm just kind of talking everything around this perspective. It gets me so frustrated, because all I hear is, we want the feel of Overwatch 1, but we want the ease of balance of 5 players, but you don't get a really good game just by taking the easy route. You don't get a really, really, really good game by taking the easy route. And we know that with, well, I'm getting obsessed with Baldur's Gate, for example, right now. That is definitely not an easy route game. They have put a lot into that game. And it's not an easy game to understand. And it's not an easy, you would never ever go, well, I'm glad that Baldur's Gate is a simple game and they made it simple for simple player. Like, I know we're talking about 2 extreme different genres here, but it just doesn't make any sense to me that you would go, well, let's take Baldur's Gate and maybe we'll just strip it down to 1 person and 1 character. We'll give them all the options and abilities. And it's like, well, we're not playing Baldur's Gate anymore. I know I'm doing a stream from 1 person for 3 NPCs and you to just you, right? Like, you're playing a different game at that point. And if you want the feel of those other things in it, You can't sacrifice for complexity. You can't sacrifice complexity for it. You just don't get the same environment. It doesn't feel like as deep of a game, and people don't last as long in those games. Like, we know this. There's long-term games, and then there's, well, for example, I will use this. Counter-Strike and TF2 are like peak numbers at this moment. And they haven't really done much at all with their game other than allow people to do whatever the hell they want with it. And yes, they've shaved it down too. You may go, well, there's not many third-party like TF2 tournaments and stuff like that. People still do small things around. You'll still see them around quite a bit, but they can do them. And that allows Valve to like come in and change up the system. But the thing is, Valve doesn't introduce a new character to TF2 because that changes the game. Like, the fundamental, they'll add new weapons because the system, the game itself isn't the weapons and the characters. I'm not going to talk too much about TF2, but like, it's just the perspective of changing the fundamentals of the game. You want to have one type of game, you can't. It's like we've used Overwatch to beta test Overwatch 2, and we have all this like data where we've like Overwatch 2 now is like balanced on this tiny little. Oh, actually, I want to point one last thing too, because Flash has mentioned this quite a few times, and it's totally true. It's like, for some reason, especially when you're on tank, when you're the solo tank, you either live forever or you die right away. And what's the reason for that? Well, you're playing two people at once. So if you're holding up, if two people are holding themselves up together, they're going to hold up as a strong wall. You break one. You break one of them down. Wasn't thinking. You break one of them down, and now suddenly, like, yes, they're weaker, but they're only at 50% weaker. But when you go to blow up a tank, when you go to blow up two people at once, poof, right? You just, like, that's a lot of power to go into something that disappears. Now, there are a lot of issues I'll point out in lower ranks with tanks being just too tanky and not being able to kill things. I know this. I'm like a low diamond / platinum player here. Very, very difficult for me sometimes. I don't know where I'm going too much with this, but it just frustrates me. It really, really frustrates me. So rethink, like, especially Jake, if you ever see this video, just rethink about what you are defining as Overwatch as the game, right? Like, are we balancing because we want to make it easier to balance? Or are we balancing to make it a better game? And why are we doing those balance changes? That's really, really, really important. Like, I feel like we're just balancing to make it feel like Overwatch 1. I don't know, say it again. Anyways, thanks guys for watching. See you next time.